In the middle of nowhere, a woman sat crying in a torn wedding dress, abandoned by the man who promised her forever. Out of nowhere, a widowed rancher stopped, offering her nothing but shelter for the night. But what began in heartbreak lit a fire no storm could ever put out. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The last train had long since pulled away, but Mara Lindley remained sitting on a splintered bench beneath the peeling awning of a depot that looked like it had forgotten how to welcome anyone. Wind cut in from the open prairie, curling around her legs like a stray dog that bit instead of begged. Her cloak, dark and fraying at the seams, hid the delicate lace of a wedding dress she no longer wanted anyone to see. It had once been her mother's, altered for hope, for promises. Now it was just fabric clinging to someone who no longer believed in what it had been stitched for. She clutched the torn letter in one hand, the part with his name soaked through and unreadable from where her tears had met the ink. She hadn't meant to cry. She'd sworn she wouldn't. But it had started the moment the station master's voice echoed across the tracks. "Last call." And no one stepped off, not him, not anyone. She'd told herself 100 stories during the wait. Maybe his horse had gone lame. Maybe he'd missed the date. Maybe he was coming on the next one. But the truth had arrived faster than the facts. The silence was too loud to argue with. Nobody was coming. She wasn't wanted, not here, not anywhere she could name. Her boots were borrowed, too tight across the toes, and the ache matched the pulse behind her eyes. Cold crept in through every seam in her life, coat, shoes, spirit. She pulled her knees tighter, not to stay warm, but to stay together. Then she heard it, the faint rhythm of hooves crunching gravel, not hurried, not casual, just steady, as if someone had seen too much in life to rush anymore. A figure approached, dismounting from a dust-covered horse with a rope saddle and a quiet patience. He wasn't young, but he was sturdy, wiry, worn in the way fence posts are after a long winter, still standing, still useful, despite everything. He paused a few feet from her and tilted his hat back with one gloved thumb. "You waiting on someone?" His voice wasn't sharp, but it carried. Not pitying, not even curious, just present. She blinked up at him, eyes glassy but guarded. "I was," she answered, her voice brittle like frost over water. He didn't nod, didn't shift his weight to speak again right away. He just took her in, the too thin dress beneath the cloak, the letter clenched like a lifeline, the dust on her hem that hadn't been there when she'd boarded the train hours ago. "Name's Jed Rourke," he said finally. "Came down for a feed order. Didn't expect company." His gaze drifted to the freight sack stacked by the station door, then back to her. "Didn't expect to find someone crying either." She looked away, embarrassed. But something about the way he stood, hands relaxed, posture quiet, told her he wasn't judging, just noticing, and somehow in that noticing something inside her softened. Jed didn't press her, didn't prod for details she wasn't ready to give, but something about the quiet of the depot, the way the wind pushed through cracks in the boards like it was trying to empty the place out completely, made silence feel heavier than truth, so she spoke. "He saw me," she said, her voice a whisper edged in glass. "Didn't say a word. Just turned around and left. Matchmakers said I was too plain, too old for second chances. Not what he expected." She didn't look at Jed when she said it. She didn't have to. Shame has a way of settling into the shoulders, not the eyes. He didn't laugh, didn't shake his head in disbelief like some men might. Instead, he just nodded once, slow, like he'd seen that kind of cruel before and knew better than to act surprised by it. "I didn't come here looking for company," he said after a beat, brushing dust off his gloves like the words needed room to land. "Just came for a sack of oats and a length of wire. But I'm not the kind of man who leaves someone crying at a depot, not if I can help it." Mara looked at him then, unsure whether the thud in her chest was fear or flickering relief. "I've got a place just outside of town," he continued, his voice level. "Not much, but it's dry and it's warm. You can stay the night. That's all. No pressure. No expectations." He didn't step closer. He didn't reach out. He just made space with his words, with his stillness, for her to choose. And in a world that had only ever taught her to beg for scraps of affection, that kind of offer felt bigger than it sounded. The road to Jed's ranch was rutted and silent, broken only by the distant caw of crows and the steady creak of leather reins. When the house came into view, Mara didn't quite know what to make of it. The roof was patched with more care than money, and the porch leaned just enough to make a person wonder if it would last the winter. But it stood tall in its own way, like it had survived not because it was strong, but because it refused to fall. The barn sagged a little on one side, and the fence posts bore the stories of too many storms. Yet the place had the look of something still trying, still worth trying for. A man emerged from the side shed as they rode up. He was younger than Jed by a few years, with sharp eyes and a stiff limp that made every step look like it cost him. "That's Eli," Jed said, dismounting. "My brother." Eli didn't wave, didn't smile. He just stared at Mara like she was a puzzle he didn't want to solve. She offered a nod, but it wasn't returned. That night, Jed cleared out the sewing room for her. Bear cot, thin quilt, thread spool still tucked in dusty drawers. She offered to cook. It felt like something she could do to earn the warmth. But her hands fumbled unfamiliar tools and the beans burned fast. The kitchen filled with smoke. Eli coughed pointedly, but Jed just opened a window. "Supper's supper," he said, eating it anyway. "We've had worse." The next morning she swept the porch. On the third, she mended a split fence post with raw hands and stubborn pride. Jed watched from the shade, arms folded. She didn't notice at first. But when she stepped back, brow slick with sweat, and caught him watching, he didn't look away. She wasn't graceful or polished or what men wrote about in letters, but she was still there, sleeves rolled, heart showing in the work. He wasn't looking for a bride. He'd made that clear. And yet, with each quiet hour she stayed, something old in him softened, not with words, but with the way his eyes lingered. A little longer every time she chose to help instead of hide. The house carried a silence that wasn't just from the wind outside or the creaking floorboards. It was the kind that settled after loss, a hush that wrapped around certain rooms like a veil. Mara felt it most near the back window, where a willow tree stood alone, its branches bowed low as if still grieving. No one had said anything directly, but the grave beneath it didn't need a name carved to explain its weight. Jed's wife had died 2 winters ago, the townsfolk had whispered. Pneumonia, quick and merciless. She'd been the heart of the place, and when she was gone, the house didn't quite beat the same. Eli rarely spoke to Mara, but the few words he did offer came cold, clipped. It wasn't anger she heard. It was mourning that hadn't found its way out. He didn't resent her presence because she was Mara. He resented her because she wasn't her. That night, long after the lamps were blown out and the fire had dimmed to coals, Mara heard them through the thin walls. Brothers talking like men do when they think no one's listening. Eli's voice was tight. "You think she's just gonna fix what's broken here?" A pause. Jed's answer came low and sure. "No, but maybe she ain't scared of what's left." Mara laid back then, eyes open, heart thudding. She wasn't sure if that was a comfort or a warning, but it meant he saw her. And that was something no one else had offered in a long, long time. The wind had shifted just after dusk, dry and restless, and by the time Eli smelled the smoke, it was already too late for prevention. Flames flickered orange along the north fence line, catching fast on the brittle grass, hungry in the way fire always is, thoughtless, consuming. Jed didn't shout. He didn't need to. He was already grabbing the pump handle, shouting directions to Eli, pulling buckets from hooks as if the fire had only confirmed something he always half expected. Mara, hearing the commotion, didn't wait to be asked. She grabbed her shawl, lifted the heavy pail with both arms, and ran. The fire roared like something alive, and the heat slapped her face before she even reached the fence. Jed and Eli were there already, beating back flames with soaked burlap and prayer. She joined in, heart pounding, dress hem catching sparks. No one spoke. They moved as one, fueled by urgency and instinct. Then came the crack. Sharp final, a support beam splintering overhead. Mara saw it fall in a breath, just enough time to shove Eli sideways. Her shoulder caught the edge of it, the pain white and sudden, and then everything blurred. She woke later in the house, shoulder bandaged, the scent of ash still clinging to her hair. Jed sat beside her, boots dusty, jaw clenched in a way that had nothing to do with anger. "You didn't have to run into the fire," he said quietly, not looking at her. She met his gaze, dry-eyed. "I had nowhere else to run." The room held stillness then, not silence, but something more fragile. Jed leaned back, rubbed his neck like the question had been waiting too long in his chest. "Do you want to stay?" he asked. Not demanding, not coaxing, just offering. And in that moment, the smoke outside no longer mattered. What mattered was that someone was finally asking her to choose. The weeks that followed didn't change the weather, but something warmer moved through the house. Mara didn't ask what she was now. Not helper, not guest. But she woke early, pulled her weight, and stood shoulder to shoulder with men who no longer treated her like a question mark. She worked in silence and let that speak for her. In town, whispers bloomed like weeds, soft, cutting things behind drawn curtains and tilted hats. The woman who'd been left at the depot was now living at the Rourke place. Cooking, mending, sleeping in the house. It didn't matter that nothing indecent had happened. The idea of it was enough. One Sunday, Jed asked her if she wanted to come to church. She said yes, though her stomach turned as they rode in together. The pews seemed to lean back when she entered, eyes pinched and watching. But when the service ended, and Pastor Cray asked if he might greet the new guest, Jed didn't hesitate. He placed a hand gently at the small of her back, turned to the room and said, "This is my wife, Mara." The silence that followed was deep, not shocked, but realigning. No veil, no ring, just that sentence. That choice. Days later, they stood under the willow tree, quiet, alone. Jed spoke no vows, only truth. "I'm not replacing her, but I think she'd want us to keep living." Mara nodded. She wasn't stepping into someone else's life. She was walking forward with her own. The sky was a pale stretch of linen as Mara stepped outside, apron still dusted with flour, hands warm from washing up. She spotted Eli near the east fence, bent low, replacing a broken rail with methodical patience. For a long while she simply watched him. This man who had once glared at her like she'd stolen something sacred. When he noticed her, he didn't scowl or retreat. Instead, he straightened, reached into his coat pocket and held something out. A small wooden pendant, smooth and simple, carved in the shape of a leaf. He didn't explain, just looked her in the eye and said, "You didn't run," then turned back to the fence and kept working. It wasn't approval, not exactly, but it was peace. And peace, Mara had learned, was earned more often than given. Later that afternoon, Jed found her at the table, pen in hand, brows furrowed as she scrawled carefully across the page. "Writing home?" he asked. She shook her head. "To the matchmaker," she said. "To thank her." He tilted his head, puzzled. "She sent you to a man who never showed up." Mara folded the letter, smiled faintly. "But if he had, I'd never have met the one who did." That evening they sat together on the porch, Jed's arm draped behind her, the dry grass rustling like an old song. He looked at her soft around the edges. I found you crying, he said. Now I can't imagine a day without your laugh. Inside, the hearth crackled. Eli whistled low while chopping kindling, and something warm simmered in the kitchen. Outside, the prairie held its breath. And Mara, no longer a guest, no longer a shadow of someone else's dream, simply belonged.